This is Smarter Cars, a podcast about autonomous vehicles.
This is the finish line. The Stanford racing team has made its way into the history books.
But the most important thing for me is, it doesn't matter who comes first. It matters that we as a community achieve it.
Early in a technology, 1,000 flowers should bloom.
Welcome to Smarter Cars. This is your host, Michelle Kairouz. In this episode, we talk with Evangelos Simoudis, the co-founder and managing director of Synapse Partners, a firm that invests in early-stage companies developing applications that combine artificial intelligence with big data. Previously, he served as a managing director with Trident Capital and Apex Partners. He's an investor, previously was an entrepreneur, and he's also an author. He recently published a book, The Big Data Opportunity in Our Driverless Future. Evangelos, welcome to the show.
Very great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you've written a very interesting new book called The Big Data Opportunity in Our Driverless Future. I'll put a link to it in our show notes so folks can read it. You have a lot of interesting thoughts about business models for autonomous vehicles and how you think they'll be used and adopted. So I thought we could start by digging in on some of that. You mentioned in your book 3 shifts that you see coming, I think, for consumers, for the auto industry, and for mobility services like rideshare. Maybe starting with consumers, can you tell us what you think transportation will look like 5 years from now and then maybe 15 years from now for sort of urban and suburban users?
So when I was thinking about the title of the book, I wanted to make sure that I look at transportation more expansively rather than just the technology of autonomous vehicles. So I purposely called it Driverless Future because for me, as part of that future, we have the contributions of autonomous vehicles, but we also have the contributions to transportation that are coming with on-demand mobility. On-demand mobility as it's being offered by a variety of mobility services, whether it is ride-hailing, as you mentioned, or bike sharing and other types of services like that. But as part of this driverless future, I see that, first of all, the consumer side, that we are starting to move from a car ownership centric model, right, where the car, especially in Western societies, in developing economies and developed economies, the car defines who we are, our economic status and the like, and moving to initially at least a hybrid model that combines car ownership with on-demand car access. And that on-demand car access could be offered by, it's already being offered by services such as ride-hailing, and I think we'll continue to see that. But increasingly, particularly in megacities, as more autonomous vehicles become available, that access offered by autonomous vehicles. So if you were to look at the next 5 years, I actually see a continued growth of on-demand mobility, but that growth coming from the use of the conventional transportation, again, whether it is the type of cars that we have today, vans, and bicycles and other means. If you're looking at a 15-year horizon, I think within 15 years we will start seeing the introduction of more autonomous vehicles. And again, when I talk about autonomous, for me is really level 4, level 5 autonomy as opposed to level 2, level 3 that to a certain extent we have today. But I see the introduction of these level 4, level 5 autonomous vehicles, particularly in mega cities and in, as I said, initially well-controlled environments. But I think this shift to this consumer shift is not predicated on the existence of autonomous vehicles, but I think will be greatly facilitated and by the existence of such vehicles.
Right. So I think what you're saying is the trend from car ownership toward car access is already happening even before autonomous vehicles are available, and you expect that would accelerate with autonomy. Is that because the price will come down and it will become more ubiquitous?
Correct. I think that, one of the reasons that I have stated that fleets are going to be the initial broader users of autonomous vehicles is because in fleets, whether it is fleets of passenger vehicles or fleets of trucks, the use of level 4 and level 5 autonomy has a great impact on the economics and as a result on the business model that such companies use. So in the book, I talk about the fact that today on the average for ride hailing, the cost per mile is around $1.6, $1.5, $1.6. With level 4, level 5 autonomy, particularly level 5, the potential is for this to come down to somewhere between 30 and 40 cents per mile. So that could give a great incentive for these companies to adopt these technologies, and that's why we're seeing companies like Uber and Lyft and Nike, leaders in this space, being so aggressive in looking at this in this technology and trying to determine how to deploy it.
As you talk about this mix of car ownership and moving toward car access and more of a rideshare model, what do you see that mix looking like in a typical family? Are you thinking that people will still own a car, but then supplement that with use of rideshare, or you think perhaps a two-car family might only have one car? How do you see the mix playing out in the hybrid model that I think you've talked about, of people using a little bit of each?
Yeah. So just to stay with your, let's call it 10 to 15 year horizon, I certainly do not see car ownership going away. But what I do see, as you correctly point out, is a shift in car ownership, and this shift will come particularly in the multi-car ownership household. So the two-car household may become a one-car household. And there might be also less incentive to update or upgrade or to change that car, over time. So whereas the replacement cycles may have been 3-4 years, in some cases that may get longer because the car may be used differently. Since it is used differently, the user may not have as much need to get access to the latest and greatest technology that comes with every car upgrade cycle. So there are implications like this. But again, as I said, I think the biggest change will be that there will be a less incentive to have two or more than two cars per household. Now, I will also say, just to be clear, and I say this in the book, that this type of model will not be exhibited universally, will not be adopted rather universally. I keep talking about megacities and very dense urban environments where we see some of these challenges that whether it is congestion, pollution, the time to travel. That have made the use of mobility services more prominent. On the other hand, in less dense suburbs, in rural areas, I do not see this type of changes taking hold anytime soon. I think we will households there will keep relying on owned cars, and many of them.
And so, the trend toward rideshare being more of an urban phenomena, you mentioned that, rideshare and fleet use is the first place where you think we're going to see autonomous vehicles introduced, not only because of the economics, but presumably because it's a more limited use case, that it's an easier circumstance to control when autonomous vehicles are introduced using a rideshare or other fleet service. Do you think that people will eventually own cars that are autonomous?
I do not have a clear answer. I can look at certain analogs. I mean, there are people in every aspect of technology that want to have access to the latest and greatest. So there will be those that will want to have the autonomous vehicle because they want access to that technology. I think there will be others that may want access to that technology because of their driving or commuting or transportation patterns. I mean, you look today, people using, let's say, something like autopilot on the freeway because of they commute long distances. It's freeway driving, and that type of autonomy facilitates their use case. Similarly, again, I don't want to only talk about the consumer side. If you look at the commercial side, long-haul trucking, they provide some great use cases for autonomous technology. But again, I see the car ownership of autonomous vehicles being probable. I don't see it as a broad use case. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I'm thinking about it today.
Yeah, so when you think about a rural user 15 years from now, you're thinking in those use cases, it will still be car ownership rather than rideshare, and that there may be less of an impetus to adopt an autonomous vehicle outside of the urban areas.
Well, I'm saying that, again, the user will have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Remember, autonomous vehicles, in order to be used properly, they require the right infrastructure. So it's not only the capability that the vehicle has, but also what is available around them. The autonomous vehicles require high-definition maps. High-definition maps are very expensive to create and even more expensive to update and keep updated. There might be less incentive to keep such map, to create and keep such maps updated in a rural area where you may have less of a use, right? Less population using it. You need instrumented transportation infrastructure. Again, I could see a great need for instrumenting our freeway system, our national highway system. I can see less of a need to instrument a rural route. Again, such instrumentation is not inexpensive. On the other hand, again, if you look at other types of autonomous vehicles, in rural areas, you could have specialized vehicles, tractors, for example, farming tractors, getting increasing levels of autonomy. I mean, you already have autonomy in such vehicles, but I could see many reasons to keep building on that capability to deal with more complex cases, to deal with, farming, to deal with the fact that you do not have a lot of people who are able and willing to work in this kind of jobs. So again, there are several types of cases that will drive the use and application of autonomous vehicles in different environments.
Right. There's been a number of articles written to the effect that consumers don't really want autonomous vehicles, that there's not a demand for autonomous features or fully autonomous vehicles. But it seems like the rate of adoption for rideshare in urban areas was pretty fast, and people adapted to it rather easily. How do you feel about consumer movement toward autonomy, and does the fact that people are used to rideshare kind of get you halfway there?
Well, I think a lot of it is generational, and also cultural. They could be in a generation where car ownership was such a principal component of life. There might be less incentive or less desire, rather, to move to fully autonomous vehicles. In a different demographic, different culture, it could be something that is much easier, something that can be adopted much easier. I think we will have to start taking that as we go along, as we start testing outside of the lab. Again, today the state of the art is lab testing, whether we do it in a constrained environment or whether we do it out on a street. It's still very much under lab conditions. But I will also say that as we are getting into these vehicles, I feel that the quality of the transportation experience is what will determine the rate of adoption and the type of adoption. And this is why I keep focusing on the big data side, because to me, it is the data and the exploitation of that data using AI and machine intelligence that will enable the companies that provide these vehicles or that provide the services around these vehicles to offer the experiences that attract or distance consumers or other users from such vehicles.
Right. And how do you see public transit fitting into this picture? If you were in charge of public transit in a city like San Francisco and you're looking out 5 to 15 years, how would you be thinking about public transit fitting into this picture?
Yeah, I actually think it is time, given the type of population moves that we are seeing to urban settings, and given what we are seeing in terms of the development of mega cities, either from the ground up for new cities that are being designed as mega cities or cities that have become or are becoming mega cities, I think it is important to start thinking of multimodal transportation as opposed to public transportation that is offered in very siloed manner. What I mean by that is that we have a subway system we have a bus system, and the two may not be coordinated at all. I think that, again, going back to this notion of transportation experiences, terrestrial transportation experiences, we need to start thinking of what it will take for me to go from point A to point B in order to accomplish a particular goal by using the most efficient, the most comfortable, the most the best way to the best means of transportation to get there, and that may involve combining a train service with a ride-hailing service with a bike-sharing service. Because I have the age to do it, I live in a city that I can do it, and all of that. To date, consumers that are very interested in that take matters in their own hands, and they're able to cobble together such solutions and meet their needs in this way. I think it is important, though, for the world, it's the city level, the state level, the country level, to start thinking of offering that position and providing that type of coordination by, again, taking into account data and capability.
Let's talk a little bit about big data, since you've mentioned it. In your example of the city trying to coordinate, maybe using rideshare for first mile or last mile, or within the city, or supplementing public transit, and working together with the various transit services, what kinds of data will we see, and how would that be used, and how would it need to be shared between the government and these other private companies or other regional transit services in order to facilitate the kind of multimodal transportation that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it is important for everybody to understand that as we're moving to these autonomous vehicles, these next generation vehicles, these vehicles are data hubs. There's a lot of data that they produce from the hundreds or sometimes thousands of sensors that they have on board. Data from the engine, from other systems. There is data that is being produced within the cabin, where the passengers are. And then there is, on top of that, there is data that is produced by other vehicles in the course of operating in this kind of an environment, as well as the transportation infrastructure. So these are very rich data lakes that are created. Now, on top of that, you can layer the data that is provided by a variety of services, weather data, traffic data, mapping data, infotainment data. For example, you saw a few weeks ago, SiriusXM acquired an automotive data analytics company called Automatic. Again, SiriusXM being an infotainment, a vehicle infotainment company, they want to be able to start analyzing some of the data that their subscribers produce in the course of using the vehicle, right? So that's kind of like a second layer. And then on the third layer is the overall consumer transportation data. So, and we're already starting to see in my firm consider investments in companies that are able to capture transportation mode. You're now, through the sensors that we have on us, whether it is in our smartphones or the wearable devices that we have, we can determine whether somebody is taking, is walking or is running or is in a car or on a bus. So we can, that's another layer of data. And then the final layer, if you will, just to your question, it would be the transportation schedules for the train, for the subway, for the buses, and all of that. So all of that data is accessible, okay? The question is whether it can be integrated. What should be the protections that we need to put in place as we integrate it, and how we will be able, what will be the financial incentive for the owners of that data to participate in this transportation data economy. And so these are some of the issues that I believe we will need to grapple with over the next few years as we become more and more aware that a lot of the, in this new value chain that is emerging, transportation value chain that is emerging, the data aspect and the insights that can be derived from that data may be one of the few and best high margin monetization opportunities that we have.
Yeah, it seems like consumers and society as a whole would benefit from the type of coordination and, in essence, sharing of this data. And the question is, will the private companies find it in their interest also to participate in sharing this data in order to make this coordination happen?
Yeah, the best example, in fact, the example I'm about to mention has been driving some of my thinking in this area. So over the past few years, I had invested quite aggressively around companies that provide online advertising solutions. And again, these were companies that were using data, analytics, machine learning type of technologies in order to make online advertising more effective. And the reason that these solutions became, at least the companies that I invested, became very successful is because the public saw that they would get certain value from accessing internet-based services, and they wanted these services for free, and they were willing to tolerate and advertising, and they wanted to, but they did not want just random advertising. They wanted to see some value even from that advertising. So with that type of an analogy, I believe that as companies become aware of what is this new value chain going to look like, and what will be the economics of this transportation shift that we will undergo because of the introduction of these technologies and these services, they will need to determine how to best monetize, and they will find that the use of data for a variety of models, subscription models, advertising models, will give them the best monetization path forward. And I believe that's what's going to convince them to change their current approach, which has been to keep this data, whatever data they capture today, which is quite limited, to be siloed and start opening up and creating what I keep calling a data sharing culture that will utilize and that will fully utilize the data that can be available.
Right. How much data are we talking about?
Well, there are again on a vehicle basis, the things vary, but it can be somewhere from a gigabyte per minute of operation to several gigabytes per minute of operation. Intel has come out publicly and talked about 4 terabytes per car per day or per vehicle per day. I think a lot of it depends on how the reason I prefer volume per time unit is a better way of describing it, is because it depends really how long you use your vehicle or that vehicle is being used on a daily basis. I mean, today we use our personal vehicles 5-10% of the day, on a personal basis. On the other hand, a ride-hailing vehicle may be used 50% of the day, so 12 hours a day, right, as opposed to 2 hours a day. So again, but we're talking about significant volumes of data. Not all of this data is useful. A lot of the data has a very short half-life, but a lot of data is being generated.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what you think these changes in transportation are going to do to the auto industry and to mobility service providers like rideshare. What are the shifts that you see coming, and how will these players be impacted?
Yeah, so the second shift that I see, so the first shift we talked about consumer, the second shift that I see is happening or needing to happen to the auto industry. And the shift there is that the OEMs need to move from designing and manufacturing vehicles to providing integrated and personalized transportation solutions to their audience. Now, in different forums, I have said that they need, OEMs need to get from the manufacturing business to the insight generation business, right? But again, more broadly for me, whether you do it through insight generation, whatever, the point is that they need to be providing solutions as opposed to just manufacturing cars. So that's important, and I think that would be probably the hardest shift, because these are companies that have been around for a long time. I mean, the automotive industry has been around 100 years. Many of the companies that are the big names in that industry have such history that is from the beginning of the automobile. So they have a particular DNA, a particular culture, and changing that and moving to a driverless future, the way I described it, I think could be particularly challenging.
And is that a revenue shift? Is that to say that instead of selling cars and charging per unit for a car, that it's necessarily going to be more of a mobility as a service, charging per mile, that kind of a revenue shift?
Well, there's definitely a business model shift, or at the very least, the addition of a model to their existing model. Again, as I said, I don't expect anytime soon to have the elimination of personal car ownership. But the question is, how many cars you'll be able to sell, what margins you will be able to extract from the sale of those vehicles. So there's definitely a business model shift, and depending on how the consumer shift takes place, there could very well be a shrinking of the business. Okay, which could have a very big, very fundamental impact on these companies. But again, if you were to look at worst case scenario, is that if you're starting to think of this new set of vehicles, these ACE vehicles, as I call them, autonomous, connected, and electrified, these require very different value chain. I mean, supply chains, right? Different components, the different uses. And that gives the opportunity for startups to come into the business and completely upend the existing and established relations, which is something that both automakers, incumbent automakers, and their suppliers, their tier one suppliers particularly, are concerned about. but you also have, as I said, the completely as part of, you can foresee a future where these automakers become just manufacturers. They're contract manufacturers, and their margins are compressed even more. I mean, that's the kind of I think concern that the industry has these days, and that's why you see them aggressively investing in innovation hubs like Silicon Valley and establishing innovation outposts in Israel and in a few other places.
And so, do you see the OEMs then really needing to engage in partnerships both with companies that can provide an autonomous technology layer as well as distribution platforms like rideshare?
Yeah, I think partnership is going to be a key word, but not the only word. I think these companies need to embark on a multi-pronged strategy. It could involve acquisitions, it could involve partnerships, it will involve investments. And it will involve a lot of experimentation. And the one of the points that I've been making more recently is that while I see them making such steps, I don't see them yet making them aggressively enough and to the scale that I believe will be necessary in order to defend against this disruption that we've been talking about.
Right. It seems like there are also, as you pointed out with respect to startups, that there are full stack, vertically integrated players. There's Tesla, there's NIO, there's now Zoox, who are trying to build the whole car from the ground up, including the autonomous technology, and also provide it perhaps as a service or in some other distribution platform. How do you think that model will ultimately compare to traditional OEM trying to structure partnerships for the technology and the distribution layers?
Yeah, so first I will say, as far as I'm concerned at least, and I'm not saying that I'm 100% right, but I think that NIO is talking about having somebody else build cars for them as opposed to them building cars, compared to, say, a Tesla, as you mentioned, that has taken full on the manufacturing challenge of the vehicle business. So I'm actually, again, a lot more bullish with companies that work on the you can call it the software layer, the autonomous vehicle brains, and all the other infrastructure that goes around it. Whether it is mapping, whether it is training, whether it is simulation, there are a number of areas, whether it is transportation coordination and management, fleet management. There are all sorts of opportunities that my firm has been investing around because of our fundamental belief of where the value is going to be. But I'm less comfortable and bullish on the value of having manufacturing capability and actually building a car, learning how to build that car for these companies. I'm not saying I'm right, but that has been my belief. I think it's a capital inefficient area. And as we've been talking about for what we're seeing with the incumbents, an area that even if you are willing to spend the capital, you're not being financially rewarded.
Right. And so you see the the profit margin being in the technology layer more so than in the manufacturing.
I do. And again, going back to these shifts that we were talking about, if you assume a world where, especially in certain environments, on-demand mobility becomes very prominent, it is not clear to me, what would be the importance of having like the best manufacturer, the best designed car in terms of aesthetics or some of the other values that we are putting today, that we're using today when we acquire a vehicle. If you look at, again, the airline industry may be an interesting analog here, an interesting exemplar here, because you look at airplanes increasingly looking very, very similar. The differentiation may be coming in the brains of the airplane, may be coming maybe in the engine that they use, even that is becoming interchangeable these days. But the general airplane has from manufacturer to manufacturer does not have tremendous changes in the way that we see cars today. So again, if you think of a world where on-demand mobility is important, and it's a primary transportation means, that type of mobility will actually thrive using fewer types of cars, because they're more easily maintained, all of the advantages, and that certainly doesn't benefit elaborate manufacturing.
Right. And let's talk about the shift in the mobility services. Today when you look at the TNC providers, it's a platform. They don't have to own assets. The drivers are bringing the vehicles to the platform. What is the shift that you see there, and how do you feel that the rideshare companies will be able to make that transition?
Yeah, so to me, mobility companies, particularly ride-hailing companies and ride-sharing companies and car-sharing companies are routers of vehicles. They do not manage the vehicle, they do not own the vehicle. That has allowed them to quickly enter markets, but has given them far less control on the user experience, and B, the economics are not great. Now, in an environment like we have today, where there is ample capital and that is looking for places for areas to be placed, this has not been a problem. But in an era where there is more constraint on the capital, that will definitely the economics will definitely be a problem, and that's where the autonomous the capabilities of the autonomous vehicles can be of help. So the shift that I see on the mobility services area is that in certain settings, it will be necessary for these transportation network companies, starting with them, to become fleet operators. That means that they will need to manage, to have full control of a fleet of ACE, these autonomous connected electrified vehicles, so that they can take advantage of the user experience like that they provide. It will be a much more controlled user experience, obviously, because they have access to the vehicle, and they will take advantage of the economics that such vehicles provide. Now, so I'll make two statements, because it's not always clear when I say this. First statement is that I don't expect that TNCs will exclusively be, or will give up their current model in order to become fleet operators. All I'm saying is that a company like Uber, a company like Lyft, In some settings, they may choose to have their own fleet. They operate their own fleet, maybe in certain cities, in certain urban settings, and whatever. And in others, they will continue they will continue using their current model. And in fact, in some areas, they may use both, right? So you look at something like New York City. In Manhattan, you may be using more autonomous vehicles, where you are a fleet operator. And in the other boroughs, you may be using your current model by utilizing other people's vehicles. So that's point number one. Statement number two is that when I talk about fleet operating companies, I don't imply that these companies will need to own these autonomous vehicles. They may be leasing them, very much like an airline leases the airplanes that it uses in its fleet. There may be these companies, these TNCs, could be leasing autonomous vehicles that some other corporation actually owns and holds the lease on.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison to the airline industry. I see the comparison when you say, well, nobody cares whether they're flying in a Boeing airplane or a competitor. They're just looking to things more like the airline, the experience of who's operating it. But when it comes to the financing, the fleet, the idea of sort of fleet financing, et cetera, it seems a little different than airlines because with the airline industry, you have many fewer planes and they last a lot longer. And cars, I think, seem like you need a whole lot of them and they're a smaller price and they last a shorter period of time. But so it'll be interesting to see how that works and how that develops. I'm not sure who the fleet owner would be. Would they be leasing it from General Motors or, some intermediary?
Again, if you look today, a company like Hertz or any of the car rental companies, they're fleet operators. Now, in their case, they take ownership of the car, and then once the car runs its useful life, they try to sell it, maybe after, I think in the case of Hertz, maybe 20,000 miles, they try to sell it. And so we're already having analogs even in the automotive world. Yeah. But again, the point that you should think about is the following, is that in let's say again with ride hailing, you don't need to have thousands of hundreds of thousands of cars in order to cover an area, right? This is not like car rental today, where stay with Hertz. Hertz needs to have a few hundred vehicles in San Francisco airport because it's typically one passenger, one driver per vehicle, right? When you're talking about ride hailing in an urban kind of mega city environment, you may be able to cover that area effectively, especially if you're managing the whole thing with a small number of vehicles. And since you have full control of that fleet and you can run that fleet for as long as you want, again, very much like an airline, you can optimize your resources accordingly. Whereas today, a TNC, if I'm a driver in a TNC, I may work for a couple of hours, then I take the rest of the day off because I choose, and the TNC has no control over me, right? They cannot compel me to go back and drive for 10 hours like in a taxi situation. Okay. So that's why I'm saying that you can do that. I mean, again, take New York. New York has 10,000 taxis, give or take. To cover the entire area, not only Manhattan, but the entire city of New York. So that could be a good analog of how many cars you will actually need in order to provide that type of service.
Right. And so, with respect to the mobility service providers, It sounds like this is mostly a positive shift, both in terms of economics and control, with the downside being just the need to become a fleet operator and that change in business model.
And that, by the way, it's not a small change because, again, these companies have not had to think about issues such as financing, issues such as fleet insurance, issues such as specifying vehicles and how many vehicles. So far they take pride in the fact that they have hundreds of thousands of drivers that have signed up to their service. There is a different set of criteria that they will need to consider. They will need to, if, for example, if you're in a city where you offer both the fleet model using autonomous vehicles and the traditional TNC model using other people's vehicles, you will need to decide how many of the other people's vehicles do I need in my service in order to optimize my own economics with my own fleet, right? And so these are, again, criteria that are not insurmountable, obviously, but these are issues that TNCs did not have to deal with to date, and they will have to as we move in that world.
More big data and complex algorithms, I guess.
You said it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to Evangelos for joining us today, and thanks to everyone for listening. You can find the show notes on our Medium publication called Smarter Cars at medium.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.